Limbo can feel isolating. No matter what the loss is, and even if it's a loss we don't know we're experiencing, it can be challenging to find others to connect with when we aren't certain what that connection should look like. Today, I'm going to share with you an ambiguous loss that I endured. It was challenging for me because at the time of the loss, I wasn't aware of it being a loss at all. As time went on, however, I became more aware of the loss in my life, and I recognized the absence. I grew up Catholic. Well, sort of. What this basically means to me is that I was christened and made my first communion, which I didn't understand, honestly, beyond being able to receive the body of Christ in church when my family went to Mass on Sundays and holidays. My family belonged to St. Teresa's Church in Harrisville, Rhode Island, like many of my schoolmates did. And frankly, my brother and I visited the church more frequently than my parents did. Every Monday after school, we would take bus 9 instead of bus 2, and we would get off at the church with a large group of our peers and go play on the grounds outside the church until we were called inside for catechism, or CCD, the religious education program of the Catholic Church. I found myself bored with the classes because it appeared to me that we were told the same stories every year, and each year I found the stories to be lacking in believability. At home, we never spoke about religion and rarely attended Sunday Mass. My grandparents, who all lived in the same town, went to St. Ambrose, their little church, every Sunday dressed in their Sunday best, and we ate fish on Fridays because my father liked that tradition. But there was little conversation ever about what it meant to be Catholic. I knew it was important to my grandmother, who frequently prayed to St. Anthony and had her rosaries, and my grandfather, who had a likeness of St. Christopher hanging from a pendant off the rearview mirror of his Buick. They had a picture of Jesus over their bed, and they were vocal about our need to attend Sunday Masses, but never really talked about the importance of their religion to them. I spent many weekends while growing up at my mother's parents' home, knowing that I couldn't wear sneakers or jeans to church, and usually forgetting to bring other clothing with me for my visits. I learned the 10 Commandments and memorized my role in the Catholic Mass in the call and responses, although I never did figure out when it was time to stand, sit, or kneel. I always had to follow others for those transitions. In spite of all of this happening around me, I felt disconnected from the church I attended, from others who seemed to have an understanding that I didn't, and even my family. As I was preparing for my confirmation at age 13, I approached my father as he was reading his newspaper at the kitchen table. "Dad," I said, "at CCD every Monday, the teacher talks about what happened in church on Sunday, and we don't go to church." I expected him to remedy this by saying, "Then let's go to church." Instead, without looking up from his newspaper, he said, "Then stop going to CCD." Initially, I was relieved and ran to my brother to tell him the news. At the time, I didn't realize that what I'd expected my father to say was actually what I'd wished he'd say, because I really wanted to feel connected to this religion, this religious path that others embraced. That's what made this loss ambiguous to me. Eventually, however, I became more uncomfortable about my father's advice and felt more isolated because I didn't have a spiritual home and was essentially on my own in finding my way spiritually. I had the strong sense that I needed spiritual connection and community and didn't know how to find it. I walked through life experiencing a sense of loss and not really knowing what was lost or how to find it. I wanted to reconnect with Catholicism when I was in college through the Catholic Center on campus that my friends were committed to, but it still didn't resonate. Over the course of my 20s, living in other countries, one Arab, I enjoyed conversations with others willing to share their spiritual experiences, although I shared little about my own. In my mid-30s, after a challenging breakup, I found myself again needing and not having a spiritual connection. It was then that I began my search for a beloved community. The first service I attended was at a Christian church. The members at the church who I met there were nice enough and invited me to return for the evening service, but I was turned off by the service itself, where the minister talked about a recent mission trip to India and how successful it was. In my 20s, I had taught English to middle and high schoolers whose first language was not English, and when I had a sense of my own participation in English imperialism, I left that life. It's probably not difficult with that information to understand that missionary work didn't appeal to me, and so this community wouldn't become my home. I'm not sure how I learned about Unitarian Universalism or of UUCA in particular, but it probably happened when I worked across the street at the Feminist Women's Health Center. After doing some research on the internet, I decided to come to a service. I drove to Cliff Valley Way and watched folks enter. Probably some of you here today. Became too nervous and drove home. My second attempt was more intentional. I sent 2 emails, one to Chance Hunter and one to a woman whose name I don't remember, to let them know that I would be coming. And while I don't remember if I received a reply from either one, I told myself I was expected and I needed to follow through. I came for Reverend McCarr's first sermon on the Four Noble Truths. During that sermon, I felt grounded and that my search for spiritual connection was over after 22 years. I knew then that I had found a community that I could be a part of and felt instantly comfortable about that decision. Since then, I have spent many a sermon crying and laughing in a space that has felt safe in a way that St. Teresa's never did. It was challenging to be in limbo spiritually for so long, especially since I'd initially lost something that didn't fit. I find that I'm still developing spiritually, but now it feels more grounded as I'm surrounded by a beloved community who understands even if we don't all believe the same. Thank you.